So what I suggest to do for viewing a Zoom event with us, in your upper right-hand corner, you'll see a view button. You can click on that. And I suggest doing a speaker view. So then you'll only see the speaker and you don't have to look at yourself, you'll look at others. We don't ask people to have their camera on anymore. And we do ask everyone to stay muted. And if you have a question, you can either type it into the chat, which is on that lower bar on the bottom, and or you can, politely ask your question when our presenter has a pause. And we'll keep an eye on that. And please ask questions. Let's make this a really interactive event. And I'm going to pass it on to our presenter from Momentum Recycling, Nicole. Thank you so much for doing this tonight for us, Nicole.
Yeah, no problem. I'm happy to be here. My name is Nicole Anaker. I work for Momentum Recycling. I'm an account manager for them. As an account manager, I help with the educational aspects for all of our current customers that are utilizing one of our 3 services. Momentum Recycling we kind of started off as a glass recycler. We own and operate the only glass recycling facility in the state of Utah. It's also one of the only facilities in the surrounding states. So we're getting glass from Idaho, Wyoming, Colorado, as well as here in Utah. We do various collections for commercial customers, and we're expanding our collections for residential. So today I'm going to be kind of giving a broad overview of those 3 services that we do that are also available to the general public and available to businesses within Salt Lake City. But it'll be a good refresher on what is accepted in the recycling here in Utah and some of the main contaminants that we want to keep out of the recycling, as well as what items are getting recycled and if any items are not being recycled, because I know that's a big question that people tend to have. So I will start sharing my screen with my presentation. Okay, can everyone see that? Okay, so the state of recycling in Utah has changed quite a bit over the past few years. I'll start with kind of the brief history of what has been going on in the state. So in January of 2018, China was kind of the end-all be-all for recycling in the United States. Everyone, including Utah, was sending almost all of their recyclable materials to China, and they were accepting it without question. In January of 2018, that changed. And they said, we don't want your waste. It's very contaminated. It's not very good recycling. It's coated with food. It's not clean. It's not sorted well. It's just like a mix of garbage that's being shipped off in boats across seas to get to China. So that kind of spearheaded the movement within the US and within Salt Lake City to start recycling locally rather than sending all of our recyclable materials off overseas, which when I first found out that all of the recycling that we're putting in our bin is getting shipped across the seas and not being recycled here in Utah or even here in the United States, I was shocked, but that has gladly changed. So since 2018 to up until 2020, Waste Management has been operating the large material recovery facility, which is what the facility is called, that processes all of our mixed recycling. So all of our plastics, cardboard, paper, metals that go in that one commingled bin, it all ends up at the Waste Management facility in Salt Lake City. They had a facility before August of 2020, but in August of 2020, they opened their very high-end, huge facility here in Salt Lake City, and that facility is processing a ton of material all throughout the Salt Lake Valley and surrounding regions. And before that facility was there, they couldn't really accept a lot of materials. They didn't have equipment to sort all of those materials, and not a lot of recycling was getting recycled. Since that facility has been built and has been in operation, they're now able to recycle a ton of materials and keep those materials here locally within the state to be recycled. Since 2018 to now 2022, 97% of materials that go into the recycling stream are now domestically recycled. Prior to that, almost 100% of those materials were being shipped overseas. So while the national sword of 2018 that China put out kind of created some issues for local haulers and for national haulers, it ended up being a good push to get those materials recycled locally. And there has also been a fairly big push for education. So I like to provide education to my current customers as well as residential customers and anyone who wants to listen about what can go where for recycling. But Salt Lake City Green has done a big push as well on the educational aspect, making sure that what we're putting into our bin is accepted and is being processed correctly. So that's kind of where we are at now. A lot of these materials are being recycled as long as we're putting them in the correct bin and we're putting the correct materials in that bin. So I'm going to go through what those materials are for the 3 streams that we have the ability to use. Glass is the first one. I'm a big proponent of glass recycling. Momentum Recycling is the glass recycler and processor for Salt Lake City and kind of the whole state of Utah. We have residential glass recycling in most of the Salt Lake Valley, as well as north up to Ogden. We have glass recycling for residents in Little Cottonwood Canyon. So if you are a resident of Little Cottonwood Canyon and would like to get a glass recycling bin for your own personal use at home, that is an option. And glass recycling is really great because it has created a lot of local jobs. We have over 20 plant employees that are working the facility on different shifts, whereas a landfill doesn't really need that many employees to operate. We are reducing emissions. We're creating a product that is being processed and turned into new products locally rather than getting shipped overseas. Glass is very heavy, so we don't want to be having to transport it very far. So the fact that we can collect it throughout the Salt Lake Valley, bring it to our facility, process it here, and then ship it within the state of Utah is a really good benefit. And glass can be recycled endlessly. Glass and metals are the one commodity that don't get downgraded when you recycle them. They can be recycled right back into that same material without any degradation. So the items that can be put in your glass bin are any colored glass. It doesn't matter what the color is. It can be bottles and drinkware, as well as window glass. We get a lot of window glass coming from window manufacturers that maybe someone ordered the wrong size, they got returned, or they're cracked and damaged. We can process that. That is a really good source of glass for us. Some of the common contaminants that we get are ceramics, because they're very similar to glass, and typically in restaurants or bars, they're using ceramic plates. And so they'll throw that in as they're throwing in their glass bottles or glass drinkware. And ceramic it burns at a different rate, and that's kind of the main reason why we can't recycle them together. When they get broken down and processed, they look very similar. So it's also hard to pull out that contaminant versus like a piece of plastic or a piece of metal. So ceramics are the #1 contaminant for our stream. So if you are recycling glass at home and you break a ceramic plate, just make sure you put that in the trash. Unfortunately, there's not a good solution for ceramics to be recycled at this time. And then one other item is mirrors or plated glass. So the front windshields of cars are coated so that when they break, it doesn't smash into a bunch of shards for your safety. So that's one type of glass that we can't accept. And then mirrored glass is the only other type of glass. Any other types of glass are totally accepted in our program. It can be broken. It doesn't have to be pure, unbroken glass, because we're collecting it in trucks that are then bumping around and they're breaking before they get to our facility. And so the process is we collect all of the residential and commercial glass in our trucks. We bring it to our plant to then process it. The first step is that it gets broken down, and the end process is it looks like a sand. So a lot of people ask if broken glass is allowed, and the answer is yes, because that's our first step to processing it. And then the end uses, sorry, my dog in the background, the end uses are new glass bottles. Fiberglass insulation is one of our big users. Owens Corning purchases our kind of glass product and turns it into fiberglass insulation in Utah. And then sandblasting is the last kind of form, and that's, we only really send it off to be sandblast material if it's really contaminated with ceramic, because they're just looking for an abrasive and they're not needing it to burn or melt at a certain temperature. So that's what happens to the glass here in Salt Lake City, and all the glass that's coming in from neighboring areas as well. And again, these are the three things that glass gets turned into. Obviously, when they're getting turned into glass bottles, we really like that because it's just getting turned right back into what it started off as. And if you live in Salt Lake City or you've driven by some of the parks, we've partnered with local artists to paint some of our dumpsters that we collect our glass in. We have a ton of drop-off locations, so you don't need a glass cart at your home. There's plenty of drop-off locations, so if you don't produce that much glass, these are a great option for you. And on our website, we have a little map showing you where your nearest location is. But this mural is really awesome. It's in Sugar House Park. It has made it so that people who lived near that park and never noticed it before now are like, oh, there's a glass recycling pod. I didn't know this until it was painted. So we're doing a push to partner with local artists to get some of these murals painted on these dumpsters to reflect the Utah culture, while also encouraging people to learn more about glass recycling and actually see that they can recycle their glass by having a more visible dumpster.
I'm gonna interrupt, and I didn't know I wasn't muted, so I'm sorry if I popped up earlier. Beth Yetter from Alta Environmental Center is on here, and with partnership of Alta Environmental Center and Alta Ski Area Momentum, we're hoping to do this in Alta too. So everyone on here, keep your eyes out for this to happen in the next spring and summer. So I'm super excited. And the artists are also local skiers and snowboarders.
Yes, awesome. Yeah, and I think Solitude and Brighton are also looking at doing a painting for, I believe they have their own glass pot up there that Momentum doesn't own, but we are definitely looking to connect these artists with the dumpsters to get them painted and looking nicer so that people want to recycle their glass and get excited to go look at them. The next kind of side of recycling that we have here in Salt Lake City is food waste recycling. Right now, this is predominantly for commercial customers, but we are currently doing a pilot. It's partnered with Intermountain Healthcare to offer food waste recycling to residents. So depending on how well that pilot goes, we are looking to expand that offering. And I've been talking with Beth, who is on this as well, about getting food waste for residential customers up in Little Cottonwood Canyon, because we currently do that for the glass and it's worked really well. But food waste is a really large makeup of the waste that we produce on a daily basis. So being able to get it recycled and recycling it properly is key. And we have an awesome facility locally in North Salt Lake that has stepped up and created an option for us to recycle and reduce this food waste. So in Salt Lake City and up in the canyons, there's two places that food waste is being recycled. One is the Wasatch Resource Recovery Digester, which is in North Salt Lake, and the other is being processed into compost up in Park City outside of Colville. So the items that are accepted slightly differ, but overall are fairly similar in those two locations. But
sorry, we have a couple of things in the chat. There's a question if there's composting, and then what happens if people misuse the food waste bins by putting trash in them? This happens so often at her apartment complex, which has these bins that she regularly puts her food waste in.
Yeah, so that is a good question. For composting, contamination is a big issue. In Salt Lake City, the facility can accept quite a lot of contamination at 7% by weight, which tends to be pretty heavy, but we do see in apartments that bins, if there's not proper labeling, they get misused, or people just see the first bin and throw their trash bag in that. So if you are in an apartment that is utilizing the food waste service, either through Momentum or through another hauler, you're more than welcome to reach out to that hauler directly, and they can provide an educational night for the residents, as well as just more signage, because it's really, with food waste, the signage is key, because without it, if it's just a bin sitting there, people think it looks like a trash can. And this happens with mixed and glass recycling as well. So for contamination, if a driver, for Momentum Recycling, if a driver opens the bin and it just looks like trash, they won't tip that. If they open the bin and it looks like food waste with like a mix of trash, they'll tip that. But again, that's more so in Salt Lake City, because that contamination can be high. Up in Park City, Little Cottonwood, and Big Cottonwood canyons, we're utilizing a farmer who really doesn't have the equipment to process out that contamination. So we're a little more strict on contamination up in those areas. Did that answer both questions, or did I just answer one? Sarah?
I think it answered. There were a couple questions that came in asking for, you know, sorry, no, I can't. A one-page handout and put in the chat. And I was thinking maybe Nicole, you and Ace can work together, and maybe we can have some of these and send them out with a recording so people can have them to print out if they wish on their own.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was one, if there, so I'm sorry, Taylor Wilcox wants to know if there's a glass pod in Alta, and from my knowledge is like private homes, Alta ski area, like Our Lady has one. Are you asking, Taylor, are you asking if there's glass drop-offs in particular? And then Valerie, okay, so yes, Taylor's wondering if there's glass drop off. It just depends where you live. If you have a private house, you can have it at a bin at your house. But if you are working at like the Rustler or something, I'm not sure on each businesses, and maybe Nicole would know who has those.
Yeah.
And then apologies, we have another question. Valerie has a question about the food waste option. Alta ski area does food waste.
And Little Cottonwood, we do have food waste at Alta Ski Area and Snowbird are our big food waste generators. We have a few of the lodges on board as well. And we are, if you want to, I can put my email in the chat as well. If you want to shoot me an email with that request, I have been kind of working, depending on where people are located within the canyon, we could see about doing a residential food waste bin, because we do have the volume right now, and we're able to kind of start adding on smaller customers, because we do have our 2 large customers. Yep, Alta Lodge does it, and Gold Miner's Daughter is about to start their food waste up in the canyon as well.
Milan, if you could put Nicole's contact information in the chat for people that have questions, it could help with this. Please.
And Kathleen, I'm looking at the chat right now as well, and then I'll get back into it. But that bill that California just passed requiring stores to donate edible expired food is really awesome. And there's another local program, nonprofit in Salt Lake City called Wasteless Solutions, and they're connecting food waste producers to donatable options within Salt Lake City, and they go as far down as Provo, I believe, and they're looking at expanding up to Ogden as well. So I will get back into what is accepted in the food waste program and then answer questions as we go as well. So one of the big things that is accepted is meats and dairies. In a lot of composting programs, these items aren't accepted just because they are hard to break down, but in both of our locations up in Park City and in Salt Lake City, these items are accepted. And then one thing that is accepted in Salt Lake City is packaged foods. So a lot of restaurants and grocers that use our processes and collect food waste in Salt Lake City like it because they don't have to break down their plastic bags full of expired products, or like an entire egg carton that has a ton of expired eggs, or a container of milk. They don't have to empty it out. They can just throw that all in because, again, we have a 7% contamination by weight, because the facility in Salt Lake City has a ton of machines that sort all of these packaged items out and depackage everything. So that is one benefit to Salt Lake City for these large commercial grocers, is just the time saved by not having to depackage products. They can just throw all the expired stuff into the bins. So that was for what is accepted. And a lot of times people ask why it's important to recycle food waste rather than just throwing it in your trash. Isn't it going to break down in the landfill? And the quick answer is recycling food waste saves on methane gas that gets produced in the landfill and just naturally when food waste breaks down. So by composting or anaerobically digesting it, that gas can be, in a compost facility, it's really lessened, and in an anaerobic digester, that gas is collected, and that's what happens in Salt Lake City. So the food waste that's collected and processed in Salt Lake City gets turned into natural gas and gets pumped back into the natural gas pipeline run by Dominion Energy in Salt Lake City. And Dominion then uses that gas as they see fit. The digester doesn't currently get a report on like tracking of where it is going, but it is going into the Dominion grid to be utilized by homes or businesses or other entities that are using natural gas in Salt Lake City. And another byproduct of the food waste that gets produced by the digester is a fertilizer that a lot of local farms then are purchasing or getting for free from the digester and using as a natural fertilizer rather than purchasing extra fertilizer to fertilize their areas. And in the landfill, food waste does not decompose. Since there is no oxygen, a landfill, I've done a few landfill tours, and everyone that works there says that a landfill is essentially a huge layer cake. Each day they're creating a new layer, covering dirt on top of it and smashing it down. And since there's no oxygen, things really don't decompose. So you could unbury that landfill and you could go look at a magazine or a newspaper from 1910 and it's going to look like it was just put there yesterday. So that's something that I didn't know until I toured that facility. And food waste is the same way. It doesn't decompose and it releases methane, which is a really powerful greenhouse gas that we don't want getting emitted into our atmosphere. So food waste is recycled by commercial entities and now a few residential entities in Salt Lake City. We provide food waste bins or dumpsters. The dumpsters are predominantly used in Salt Lake City because we have separate vehicles. And these carts are used in smaller restaurants and up in the canyons because of the trucks that we have. We can't, a lot of people ask if they can do glass and food waste in one bin. Right now, we don't have the sorting materials to be able to be capable of doing that. So we need two separate bins to keep the items separate. At some point, maybe we will have that capability to sort all of those out, but right now we just keep a separate bin. Our food waste bins tend to be green in color and they have stickers on the top so that people know exactly what is going in them. In Salt Lake City, we allow the food waste to be bagged in clear plastic bags because, again, that facility has a depackaging machine and they're collecting all those plastic bags and taking them out. Up in the canyons, we use compostable bags because the farmer does not have the means to sort and rip apart plastic bags, and the compostable ones do break down in their facility. We transport the food waste to those 2 separate locations in trucks. This is one of our larger trucks tipping in Salt Lake City. For the canyons, we have a smaller kind of Dodge Ram truck with a 8 to 10 yard kind of hitch on the back that we then tip food waste into using our cans. We then transport it either to Park City's location or we transport it to the North Salt Lake location. In the North Salt Lake location, that food waste gets screened by like a really fine mesh screen, and then it gets kind of sucked in this underground tunnel into their big digesters. So this screen is kind of the last point of contact where any plastics or things that are not food and not small enough to fit through that screen are filtered out. They have really high-end filtering. They have a very low contamination rate in their food waste, which is really awesome. And then it gets put into this big digester. This is what it looks like in the inside. We can't actually see what it looks like in the inside because it's very high in heat and just kind of toxic inside, but all of the organic waste breaks down, and they like to say it's similar to your stomach. So anything that would probably make your stomach kind of hurt or be unhealthy for you, like heavy in fats and oils, is really good for the digester. Their microbes really enjoy that and run off of that very well. And since they're breaking down the materials without oxygen, the result is a biogas, predominantly methane, that then floats up to the top of these little pods and then gets pumped out. And it's turned into renewable energy, which can power homes or other things as the grid sees fit, and that fertilizer again. That was food waste. So if anyone has questions on food waste before I move on to kind of the last, all recycling in your blue bins, I'm happy to answer those now.
I actually, when you were talking, I went on to Momentum's website and looked at the food waste, if like I could have it at my home. And I saw that it was a pilot program, and I did sign up for, future opportunities. So if people are wondering why they didn't know about having food waste opportunities at their house, it's because it's a pilot program, and sign up for it.
Yes. And then I'm seeing a question about flowers and if you need to buy your own compostable bags. For the pilot, we provided residents with compostable bags because we were getting extra funding and we're able to do kind of extra add-ons. And we are currently working on getting a relationship with either BioBag or one other compostable bag company so that we can reduce the costs on compostable bags, because they are an expense and an added expense. If you're just a resident, you don't need to bag your food waste. It just tends to keep the bins cleaner than if you don't bag them. And then for flowers, as long as they're freshly cut, they are accepted in both Salt Lake City and Park City. If it's a whole potted plant, they know neither of the locations really want soil. So if you kind of get the soil off the potted plant, you can put that in. But if it is a dead plant or very like fibrous, the Salt Lake City facility can't accept that. So they can't accept like trees or branches or limbs like that, but the Park City location, since it is a composting facility, can accept that. Just the microbes don't, similar to like we wouldn't munch on a stick, the microbes also don't really like the sticks or like really heavy matter like that, but they will eat freshly dead flowers, if that makes sense. And then I think that was all of the questions. For leaf collection, if you are living in Salt Lake City, you have your compost bin, your yard waste bin, and so that does accept leaves, twigs, things like that. If you have a compost bin through Momentum for your commercial business, or you happen to join the food waste pilot that is in Salt Lake City, in like a very small section of Salt Lake City, but hopefully getting expanded, then those leaves and twigs need to go in that yard waste bin rather than the food waste bin. Okay. Yep. And in the yard waste bin, you can put fruit and vegetable scraps. Again, sorry for my dog. Just no meats and dairies in that yard waste bin. So that's kind of the only real separator. Is if you have the yard waste bin, you can almost put all of your food waste in it. It's really just meats, dairies, eggs, things like that, that the city of Salt Lake City is not wanting in that bin. Okay. Oh, that is good to know about the compostable bags. I will pass that along as our pilot is going about just paying a flat fee and then getting compostable bags for the year. That is a good idea because yeah, right now the first roll of bags for the residents that they started with came with their bin, and then they have the option of buying more if they need them. So I will get into our last kind of subsection of recycling, which is mixed recycling, which in Utah, it is everything goes commingled together in one bin. In other cities and states, you might find that the bin has a divider and you're only supposed to put paper on one side and cans, bottles, metals on the other side. But here in Salt Lake City and the surrounding cities, everything goes just all together in one bin, and then it gets sorted at the material recovery facility. And again, recycling creates jobs. If you go on a tour to the recycling plant, it's very lively. There's a lot of people working. There's a lot of equipment running. They use mechanics. They use their recycling facility in Salt Lake City uses a ton of manual labor versus a landfill. When I've done the landfill tour, there's 3 employees at max at one time that I have seen locally. Whereas the facility in Salt Lake City, the waste management and recycling facility has probably upwards of 50 to 100 people on site throughout the day making that plant operate. So what is accepted in the mixed recycling? I can hover around this for a little bit because I know this gets confusing. There's 3 kind of different subsections. There's paper, which includes cardboard, paper, office paper, paper bags, clean egg cartons, any clean paper. So as long as your paper was not used for food, so a paper plate that you ate food off of is now contaminated and that is not accepted anymore. But if you had a ton of paper plates that you didn't use and you didn't want to offer to someone else to use, those can go in as long as no food was touched and used on that paper and it's clean and dry, it's good to go in that stream. So again, like paper towels, napkins are not accepted because they are already kind of a low paper count and they're usually covered in food. So we don't want those contaminating the food waste stream. And then frozen food boxes can't go in the recycling because they're usually lined with a plastic layer. There are some companies like Amy's and other more like eco-conscious frozen food companies that don't have that plastic liner, but my rule of thumb is tear a piece of that paper or that box that you're worried about maybe having a plastic liner on top of it. If the tear mark comes clean and just has paper shreds on it, once you tear it, then it's good to go. When you tear it, if you see a fine line of plastic start peeling up, then that is lined with plastic and is not accepted, unfortunately. Plastic.
Sorry, a comment did come up that I'm curious about, like in Utah, we're in consistent state of drought, and what's the balance of rinsing something out to recycle and using the water like a peanut butter jar versus
Yeah.
tossing.
Yeah. And so it differs state to state, but here in Utah and here at our facility in Salt Lake City, as long as it is dry and essentially the same weight as it would have been if that product was empty. So if your peanut butter jar is still half full of peanut butter, you're going to need to clear it out. Hopefully compost it if it somehow expired and got moldy, which I've never seen peanut butter get moldy, but just make sure it's empty. But otherwise, as long as it is, for the most part, dry, still not dripping, and weighs about what it would weigh if you really did a diligent job cleaning it, it's good to go. They, even on their website, will say, like, please do not wash your recyclables. It just needs to be empty and relatively the same weight as it would have been if it was fully cleaned, but you can leave that like thin layer of peanut butter that you can't get out on the peanut butter jars, because when it gets sorted, it's sorted by optical sorters by weight. And then essentially it's going to be getting melted down at one point. So all of that small residue of food waste is going to get burned off. But we don't want people using a ton of water to make sure their recyclables are super clean and shiny. They just need to be dry and not super heavy with food waste in them.
And then when we get to plastics, I'm sure you'll address the numbers of what are accepted and stuff. That was just another comment that came through.
Yep. And so for plastics, any hard, rigid plastic is accepted in the bin. Some big things that aren't accepted are styrofoam. You might find that styrofoam has that triangle on it with even a number on it. Even though it has that, it doesn't mean that it is recyclable. In some municipalities, they will recycle styrofoam in their curbside collection. Here in Salt Lake, we do not recycle styrofoam. There are a few outlets that I can touch on that are accepting styrofoam. Up in Park City, Recycle Utah has a collection for styrofoam. And then in Salt Lake City, Marco Products create surfboards out of styrofoam, and they accept clean styrofoam at their facility for drop-off, which is really neat. And not a lot of places have that. But even though there's a number most likely on that styrofoam, it is not accepted in your residential, just curbside bin. And plastic bags are another big contaminant. You can collect those and dispose of them at certain locations, but they can't go in your recyclable bin. And a lot of people want to do a good job and make sure everything's close together, and so they bag their recycling so that it doesn't get lost in transport. That makes it so that that recycling is now contaminated, and the sort lines go super, super fast, and they can't be opening bags and emptying out recycling. So we like our recycling to be loose, clean, and dry in our bin. That's kind of the motto for all three materials. And then lastly, for plastics, the numbers. There's going to be a number symbol on most plastics. And if there aren't, then it's most likely that it's not a plastic that can be recycled. But the numbers go from number 1 to number 7. And number 1 and number 2 mean that they're freshly made plastic. That's the first time they've been made into an item. You normally see number 1s and number 2s on plastic bottles, milk jugs, things like that, that are kind of softer plastics, but also pretty rigid. And as you go up in the number, that just means that it's that number 2, when it gets recycled for the first time, it turns into a number 3, number 3 turns into number 4. And that's kind of how we get the numbers. So in Salt Lake City, they do accept all plastics, number 1 through number 7. But if you're looking for plastics at a grocery store, you're buying something in plastic, check the bottom. Number 1 and number 2 are going to be able to be recycled more than a number 7. A number 7 might be able to be recycled into maybe a deck board, but then once number 7 is recycled, that's the last thing it's going to be recycled into, whereas number 1 and number 2 are going to get recycled a few more times before they end and get their kind of like end lifetime recycled item.
Okay, we have a bunch of stuff in the chat. Plastic tape on boxes, do those need to be cleared?
No, just as long as it's not covering the whole thing, but if it's just the tape that's securing the box in place, that's a very minimal amount of tape, and that's totally fine.
2 people commented for everyone just saying that Target and Smith's, and I know the Smith's on Bengal Boulevard also accepts plastic grocery bags, and then also plastic films like Amazon shipping bags, which is like great to know for a lot of people that might not know that. And then what if we move our recycling around the resort in plastic bags? And then are all lids to plastic bottles accepted in the regular bin?
Yeah, so for the first one, if you're moving your recycling around in plastic bags, as long as when you get to your kind of bin that gets serviced, as long as you're emptying that recyclable content and getting rid of the bag at the end, that is totally okay. A lot of places will collect their items in just like a plastic bag liner because it's easier to transport, and then they just have facilities dump it loosely into the bin. So that is totally fine. And then for lids are really small, and that's one other thing that I didn't touch on with paper, and then I'll also touch on metal. Shredded paper and lids are 2 items that are just super tiny, and by the time they get through the whole process and on all the conveyors and through all the sorting equipment, they end up falling through the cracks and don't get recycled. So for lids, you can leave those on your bottle or jug or whatever container they came in, for those really small lids. And then if you have shredded paper, they like to say, put it all in a brown paper bag or any paper bag and staple it shut. That way, and you can even label it shredded paper so that when it comes through, they see it like that. But that way it's contained and it's still going into the paper pile versus going somewhere else, and it's not just like flying all over the facility and not ending up getting recycled.
Okay, a couple more before we move on to metal. Thank you for being patient with all these questions. It's great. A question on, do plastic bags actually get recycled? So if you bring them to like Smith's or Target, like what's their actual, future? And then what about glossy paper? And then under the impression that recycle symbol with 7 was for compostables. Is this incorrect?
So for the first one, for plastic grocery bags, we are lucky that we have a company called Renewlogy. I believe they just changed their name to Renew One. It's a local company in Salt Lake City, and that's where all of the plastic films and bags that are being collected in Salt Lake City are going to. I know that Smith's has contracts and they might ship them out to whoever they're contracted to send their plastic bags to, but if someone is collecting plastic bags and they're not under a contract to ship them out to a certain place and they're in Utah, they're getting sent to Renew One or Renewlogy. And that company just focuses on plastics and turning plastic back into its natural form to be, they pelletize it and send those pellets out to be turned back into other plastic items or plastic things like deck boards and things like that. So plastic bags here in Utah do get recycled. In some other states, they might just have a recycling collection for them and not do anything with them, which is unfortunate, but they do get recycled here in Utah. And then for the number 7 symbol, compostable plastics are now also utilizing the number 7 symbol, and styrofoam also utilizes the number 7 symbol. So if it's number 7 PLA, that means that it's compostable plastic number 7. If it just has the recycling symbol and it just says 7 with no PLA under it, then that is regular plastic recycling. And then if it's styrofoam and it says number 7 on it, you'll know that it's styrofoam because it is styrofoam, but that is styrofoam also uses that. So the numbers get confusing because some of them get used by a lot of different commodities, and gets confusing in that sense, but that was a good question. And then for glossy magazines, those are accepted if it's a laminated item that is plastic melted on top of paper at that point, and that is not accepted in the recycling. But a regular magazine is accepted in the recycling, just not laminated. And then the last question that I'm seeing, and then I'll get into metals, but metals are pretty simple. Renewlogy, I can double check with them. I have their contact. I'm not sure if they have a drop off or if they're just utilizing Target and Smith right now. But I can double check and send out an update if they do have a public drop off for people. Like Marco Products has a public drop off for their styrofoam. I can look into that after this. And then for metal recycling, metal's pretty easy. They typically won't have any recycling symbol on it, but cans, bottles, empty aerosol cans, that's the keyword for aerosol cans. That's a common question. As long as it's empty and no longer has any material, it's no longer listed as a hazardous waste. If it's a half full aerosol can, that's technically still hazardous waste, needs to be disposed of at a hazardous waste facility. And then for metals, if you have a soup can and it's empty, you don't have to rinse the soup can dry. As long as the metal can is just no longer leaking food waste or liquid, it is fine to put in your recycling bin. And then if you have aluminum foil that has food waste on it, a rule of thumb for aluminum foil is to make a ball that's about as big as a baseball or tennis ball. As long as it's that big, it can go in the recycling. If it's smaller, it's just similar to bottle caps and other things. It just doesn't get recycled because it's so tiny. And if there's food residue, just make the ball, wrap it in such a way that the food residue is on the inside so that it's not contaminating the paper that might be on that in that same load. But that's kind of the breakdown of what is accepted in Salt Lake City and the surrounding areas for mixed recycling. I'll see if there's any questions.
There's a question on a Tetra Packs, and then wrappers on cans. And then I've noticed a lot of seltzers and beers have the wrapper that can come off. So obviously we recycle the can, but any thoughts on those wrappers too?
Yeah, so for cans that have a sticker on the outside, I just talked to the material recovery facility a few weeks ago because a lot of smaller brewers are wanting to just sticker their cans rather than have like a larger label on them. And both stickers and labels are fine on cans per the recycling facility. So you don't have to try to get that sticker off. You can just put the can straight into the bin. Tetra Packs, unfortunately, are not accepted in the regular mixed can. If you go on Tetra Packs website, you can type in the zip code and see if there's any local facilities that are collecting them. Tetra Packs just have about, I think, 6 or 7 layers of different materials. And because they have an aluminum layer to them, the magnets at most facilities will think that it's a metal can when it's not. So Tetra Packs, you can collect them and look them up and see if any local facility is looking to recycle those in the area, but they cannot go in your mixed recycling, unfortunately. And then for those wrappers that are on top of the cans, it depends on what they are. I've seen some that are just aluminum. If they're just like an aluminum thing that you peel off, you can just kind of stick it back into the can because it's an aluminum can and an aluminum wrapper. If they're the kind of plastic tops that you break off, those they're big enough and they do have a recycling symbol, so you can just throw that whole large piece off into the recycling. And then I have seen a few, Keto's Brewery in Salt Lake City recollects those, and I think some other smaller brewers also will collect those back from you to save money on their end. So that's an option if you want to reduce rather than, or reuse rather than recycle. And then if it's just the old style where it's just that plastic liner, though that plastic liner is considered like a plastic film and can go in the plastic film recycling at Smith's and Target and other grocery stores, but it can't be recycled. And if it does get landfilled, I've seen things about cutting it up so that it doesn't harm sea life if it ends up in the ocean, unfortunately.
There's two that comments in the chat that we haven't addressed. Milk cartons, and I don't know if that's plastic or cardboard, but we should probably talk about both. And then glass containers with metal tops, should they be attached to the bottle in the bin?
Yep, so for milk cartons, paper and plastic are both accepted, as long as they're empty and not leaking material anymore. But again, you just put the cap back on for both of those. So those are both accepted in the recycling. And then for glass containers, you can leave that metal lid on. We actually kind of like to say that you should put all of your small little metal lids in the glass bin, because we have magnets and our facility isn't that big. So all of the metal caps and bottle caps get basically magnetized up onto our magnet, and then we collect it all and we take it to Western Metal Recycling. So those little metals do get recycled in our facility. And it's one less step for you. You can just keep that lid on the jar. It's not an issue. And for glass recycling, corks are also, you can throw those in the bin. We collect all of the corks and take them to Clever Octopus for their reuse. Okay, I'm seeing one other one about paper hot coffee cups. Those are lined with plastic, and because they are lined with plastic and typically have quite a lot of food residue on them, they are not recyclable. Some municipalities in California recycle them or end up composting them. If they are labeled compostable and you're up in one of the canyons, those can be composted. But if they're just a regular paper hot coffee cup with that plastic liner on the inside so that it doesn't leak through the cup, those are not recyclable. They have to be landfilled. And then the last question, which is a good one, are everything that's collected kind of on this list recycled here, or a lot of them shipped off? Almost all of these are domestically recycled. A lot of them are even recycled in Utah. The only item that the MRF has said they're still shipping overseas is cardboard. So that is the only item that I am aware of that does not have a domestic buyer. And I think it just has to do with the lack of facilities for cardboard recycling. In the US, we have quite a few paper pulp facilities, but cardboard takes a lot more equipment to break down. So that is the only item that is being sent overseas. But there is a local company called, I'm blanking on the name, but they have quite a few drop-off locations for paper and cardboard, and they turn that into insulation it's like paper-based insulation similar to fiberglass insulation. So if you're looking to keep your cardboard local, you can drop it off at those drop-offs, and I'll Google it and remember what the name of that company is called after
Someone
this.
just put in the chat that it was green fiber.
Yep, green fiber, yep.
And then you're getting a bunch of praise too in the chat.
Oh, thank you.
We are at 7:30. We can take some more questions. I do have to say that this has been one of the most informative 1 hours of my life that I've had recently. I just feel like everybody is very confused about the how and why and the ifs. And you spoke very clearly and consistently about everything. It was great. Someone asked about a tour of Momentum.
Yes, and Hillary, I'm seeing your comment as well. So all three of these facilities, so Momentum's glass recycling, Wasatch Resources Recovery's food waste digester, and the waste management material recovery facility where all of this mixed recycling, so everything on this slide gets sent to that facility. They all offer tours to the public, and they all offer tours to small groups and large groups. I've done a tour for just a mom and her son recently of the glass facility, and the digester is always open to doing tours for large groups, but also like 1 or 2 people. And the material recovery facility for the recycling plant is the same way. So they're all open to doing tours, and I think tours are very educational too. They'll touch on things that I probably wasn't able to bring up here, especially just in terms of mixed recycling. That's one thing that's always changing, because as soon as they find a buyer for a new commodity, they're now able to accept that commodity. So that's one. With food waste and glass, the items we accept don't change that often, but for the mixed recycling, they are kind of changing based on if they lose a buyer or if they gain a buyer for certain commodities. And that's interesting. But for the most part, it's staying the same, but that tour would be very informational just on like the intricacies and like the small things, and just being able to see people sorting on the sort lines and all of the materials that people throw in the recycling bin that don't go there, like plants and trash. So
someone actually just commented like, how can we keep up? And I wanted to bring this up that that I believe I follow Momentum on social media, and you guys did a post about like wrapping paper. So how can people keep up with it?
And this is my dog. Yeah, so you can follow us at Momentum. We post a lot about glass, but also about mixed recycling and food waste. And then Wasatch Resource Recovery predominantly will post about food waste and their collection efforts. And they have started doing kind of pods throughout the valley, just like we do glass pods. They're starting to look into doing food waste drop-off pods. And then another good resource would be Salt Lake City Green. They post a lot just about all 3 outlets, mainly mixed recycling for residents and your yard waste. And that is kind of, those 3 entities are really knowledgeable. I'm not sure Waste Management has like a separate Instagram or social media account for their Salt Lake City location, but those Wasatch Resource, Momentum, Salt Lake City Green, and Wasteless Solutions, if you know of any friends that have a restaurant or just have a potluck and have a lot of leftover food that's still edible, Wasteless Solutions uses volunteers, or if you want to be a volunteer to kind of cart food waste around the valley, they use volunteers to connect food waste that is still edible and good to eat, and most of the time packaged, coming from large catering events to different nonprofit organizations that are able to use that food the same day.
People are just saying like, thank you for actual answers, and saying that in the valley that a lot of information that's coming from the cities is just complex, and people aren't following the rules. And then a couple of things about recycling glass up here. So.
Yeah, and I would say I'm seeing the one about Sandy, and I wasn't aware that they just reduced their recycling collections to every 2 weeks, which is unfortunate. And overall recycling, I've been in this industry for the past almost 3 years at various different cities and states, and signage and just what is accepted where is different. I was living in San Francisco, and you would go to a city like the neighboring city, and what you could recycle there is completely different, which is unfortunate, but it's all just based on the facility that you have to process that recycling. So here in Salt Lake City, we have a really awesome facility, but we haven't had it for very long. So we're able to now process things that we might not have been able to do before August of 2020. And for I will say though, for residential, typically you don't have that much contamination coming from residential customers. And in Salt Lake City especially, they have an entire team dedicated to education, and they'll go out on a route and look at people's recycling bins and tag you if you did something wrong, which is helpful sometimes if it's like very clear what they're saying is wrong about that. But it all comes down to utilization. So it might have been, I'm not sure what happened in Sandy City about why they decided to reduce the recycling, but it could have been utilization. It could just be a temporary thing because they don't have enough staffing. But that is a bummer, and it is frustrating that people can't follow the rules or like don't know what goes where. But just education is everything, and why I'm hoping to be able to talk to more people just about what they can and can't do so that we can continue growing recycling rather than getting rid of it because there's too much contamination. But commercial entities tend to contaminate just a little more than residential, especially apartments. It's hard to make sure everyone in an apartment is following the rules, but I like to be an advocate and let people know what goes where. And now that everyone has a little more knowledge, hopefully, about what goes where and a little more confidence, you can also be that advocate to let neighbors know or your friends know if they have questions.
I do see at the bottom of the screen that there is a Momentum Recycling mobile app. So if you have questions about recycling, you can go to the app and ask them or find out answers. And then there's more comments about the Sandy.
And then, so this information, what goes in the recycling bin would apply to Sandy as well. It's just most of the materials, most of the recycling from North Salt Lake, Clearfield, Roy, down to Provo area are all going to the one facility, the waste management facility operated in Salt Lake City. And so that's where Sandy's recycling is going as well. But each city can kind of choose what they do and how they collect and how they transport those materials to the facility, but this information would be accurate.
Well, Nicole, thank you so much. And thanks to Momentum for always being a part of Little Cottonwood Canyon. You guys have, since day one, so involved. Everyone that's on this, you will receive a recording of it. We'll include information how to contact Momentum. And then Nicole, if possible, if you could send us the images of the mixed recycling and then the food waste, and I would love to include that on the email. And we'll probably send that out, the recording, whatnot, tomorrow.
Definitely, I can get that sent over.
And thanks to Milan as well for setting this all up and letting everyone in the weight room. So thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Nicole.
Thank you.